It's got the largest concentration of megalithic stone building sites from the Stone Age in the world. It's littered with them. And the original settlers from Italy, from areas like Sicily, when they came over to Malta in the Bronze Age, they came and they found this island covered in temples, but no one living there. No one knows who constructed all of these weird temples on this island, but there's one in particular called the Hypogeum, which is underground. It's this subterranean, incredible, multi-layered, geometrically crafted limestone temple, all out of the solid limestone bedrock, at a time before the wheel, at a time before bronze and copper tools. This is deep into the Neolithic. They date it to like 5000 BC, but that's because that's as far back as they can go. I'll go way further back. I'd say 10, 12, 15,000, you know, in terms of how ancient this site is. But it's acoustically profound. It resonates at exactly 111 hertz, which changes the brainwave into theta. And there are these elongated skulls that were found inside the Hypogeum. One of them is on display in the Museum of Archaeology in Valletta. And the interesting thing about these ones in particular, these skulls, is they actually lack the sagittal suture, which is the vertical crack that goes down the skull.
So you must be pretty excited. I saw that your documentary was dropping today, and you're all over Egypt, which I think is amazing. That was sort of my first love as a kid. My grandfather was also big into history.
Yeah,
and,
me too.
He always had a bunch of Egyptian artifacts and art around his house. And when he came and visited me when I was a kid one time, he brought me a book on King Tut's mummy. I think that might have been what it was called. And ever since then, that's always been like my first love of history. And I think like most people, we've all had this thought or feeling that there was something more than what you're being told. And this has now been my favorite part of the timeline, where people like you and so many others, right, have finally started digging into. We're getting LiDAR scans. You know, people are pushing back on the narrative. You know, people are calling out Zawi Hawass for certain things. And, you know, I'm learning so much about it. And then also it's like, yes, I've known this for so long that there was something more going on. And, you know, your Secrets of Saqqara, right, is what it's called?
So the series is called Ancient Technologies, but this one, the third episode, is the Secrets of Saqqara. So we go through the Saqqara complex, which is in the Western Desert, about an hour and a half drive out of Cairo. And it's an incredible complex, but we go into some of the more anomalous elements of that complex. It's an incredible 4K quality expedition that's never been done before in terms of that kind of a quality, taking people through these different areas. And like, same as me when it comes to Egypt, I got fascinated out of nowhere as a child, actually really quite spontaneously at like the age of 8. I just suddenly decided I really wanted to know more about Egypt and got all the books and started learning about hieroglyphs. And you know, that faded away when I became a teenager, but at that point early on in my childhood, it became this like weird little catalyst in my mind. And, you know, the Mummy movies were always like my favorite movies and still are, like such a nostalgia trip to watch the Mummy movie. And I think all of that just threads in all of this mystique and mystery. But when you go out to Egypt and you actually go to these temple sites and you go to the pyramid complexes, the mystery doesn't do anything other than increase from the Hollywood projection that you get from films, because there is incredible anomalies all over Egypt. Like every element of the ancient world of Egypt has something that is not quite right. And I think the really interesting thing about it, because I think for me, quite shocking going into this type of research, was like the realization that it didn't even take much time to start finding things that just don't make sense. And you start realizing that the education that you got through school and this very kind of packaged, curated narrative about what Egypt was and how the pyramids might have been built and, you know, what they were, it just does not make any sense whatsoever. And so, yeah, like you say, and I agree, it's very refreshing to see the alternative media space starting to rise up in popularity, to see people starting to question more. It's great to be playing some form of a role in that by putting out this stuff. And I've been very lucky to travel out there and, you know, meet incredible people like Jeffrey Drum, the Land of Chem, the guy from the Land of Chem, absolutely brilliant. Like without him, that series wouldn't be as good, because he was just such a phenomenal presenter. And he's got a very unique hypothesis about what the function of the pyramid sites were in these complexes in terms of chemical manufacturing on a major mass industrial scale. And I think he's got something. I think he's onto something here. I don't think it is the full picture. I think that Egypt represents a very interesting symbiosis between spirit and science, like the alchemy and the chemistry. So I think that there's like a chemical component, because it certainly seems to be evidenced in what he's presenting, but I think it goes deeper than just that, and perhaps this was facilitating a larger, what we might call a spirit science of some form. So yeah, it's fascinating. And then the last thing I'll just finish up on there is just, the Khafra pyramid team coming out with these synthetic aperture radar scans from satellites, finding, these incredible structures underneath the Giza plateau, which, still needs to be empirically evidenced. But what I think is undeniable at this point, and I would put my, money on this, is that there are things underneath the plateau that they have found. Whether or not they are exactly what's been depicted in these 3D stylized models, that's to be debated, but they have found extremely large signatures going underground. So yeah, dude, it's a very interesting time to be deep in the alternative history space, that's for sure.
It is. I was listening to the podcast you just did on American Alchemy, and you were talking about how you had the opportunity to go there with Tim Hogan. We just had the pleasure of interviewing him, and he kind of talked a little bit. He is. He was talking a bit about some of these alchemical processes, and I can't remember the plant that he was talking about, that if you get it back down to its monoatomic base principles or whatever, it turns into hydrofluoric acid. And there's some of these elements that he thinks that's kind of one of the vehicles they use to shape some of these stones. And you'll probably know way better than me, but there's a set of stairs that look like something is spilled down them.
Yeah, very melted.
I was just looking at those stairs the other night. We were talking about them, and it seems like it makes a lot of sense, because if you ever spilled something downhill, it all just starts to pool at the bottom, and that's kind of what it looks like. As it gradually gets down to the bottom of the staircase, the wider it is, the delta of whatever was spilt on the staircase.
And an important point to note with that as well, because a lot of people will say that it's just erosion from footfall over many, many years, is that there are other stairs all over that temple complex that don't have the incredibly deep erosion patterns that you see on that particular staircase. And this is in, I want to say, the Temple of Dendara, that's dedicated to Hathor. This is an amazing temple site. I've got a video on my YouTube channel that's pretty old now. I should probably re-upload it again, because it's just really worth re-uploading. Going into the subterranean complex of the temple, and that's where you have the infamous light bulb image. Have you seen this before? It's quite a famous one of like, what is this? This like giant being, because it is a giant being. There's 3 smaller humans depicted next to him, kind of praying in veneration to him. And he's holding this giant, bulb that looks like a light bulb, and there's like a lotus flower inside it, and it's symbolic but suggestive, very suggestive. Yes, and there's a lot of imagery in that whole subterranean chamber, sacred geometry, cymatics, gateways, and it's a very weird chamber. The whole site is strange, and Hathor is strange as well, because Hathor kind of ties into Ishtar, which ties into even the UFO subject, and people who have claimed to see this goddess throughout time. It's also known as the the white buffalo calf woman, and the woman in white that Chris Bledsoe claimed to see. That's also believed to be Ishtar or Hathor. So there's like this weird symbology that's echoed through time, even into contemporary visions and prophetic ideas, and yeah, dude, fascinating, really, really fascinating.
It is. And to your point earlier about the natural wearing away of stone, I mean, we just talked about I've lived in Europe, honestly, maybe 12 years of my life. I've been to 100 different castles, been to 100 different palaces. I've been to Roman ruins, all these things. And you can see the wear and tear on staircase. And it's very evident when it's from people walking. It's also very smooth. That staircase is not smooth at all. It looks very much like what you'd see if you had like an aerial view of a dried up river delta, and there's all these different crevices and grooves where the water flowed deeper and all these things. That's kind of what it looks like. It's not the very smooth that you get when you walk on a set of stairs for 800 years or whatever in some of these castles. I was just going to say too, like the experience of walking into ancient Egypt and going into a lot of these temples and with Tim Hogan had to be amazing. What was that like? What did he show you? He tried to get me to. I wish I could go. He invited us, but I can't. I just can't go right now. But what was that like?
Oh, dude, that was amazing. That was my first trip out to Egypt ever. And I was really fortunate, actually. The whole thing felt very synchronistic, because I was going through some stuff in my life at that point, like personal life and things that were not too great, and I was in a pretty down state in my kind of day to day. And I actually, before I even had any thought about like going to Egypt or anything like that, I was like, I need to get out of this rut. You know, I'm gonna get a tattoo and get a bit of ink because I like to get tattoos.
Nice.
I've only got a few, but you know, I'm kind of like itching to get a sleeve done at some point. But I like them to actually mean something, so it takes a bit of time to get those things put on you. You know what I mean? But
Totally.
I decided to get the lean over. Got the Staff of Hermes. This is a Greco-Egyptian version of the Staff of Hermes, which is Hermes Trismegistus. Or also
Yes.
in Greek mythology, it's Hermes, the messenger god, with the winged boots and all that.
Right.
But it meant a lot because I really resonate with the kind of teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, Hermeticism. This is the as above, so below, as within, so without. This whole idea of the
Right.
universe being a reflection of your inward universe, the micro and macrocosm, which is very important to Egypt. And so I got this tattoo as a kind of like a symbolic representation of like I'm moving past this. I'm kind of going through a transformational state, and I'm gonna respect that. And then within about a week, I got invited to Egypt. Like this guy, just a friend of mine, messaged me saying, "Hey, I'm heading out to Egypt with Timothy Hogan and a bunch of these guys, and I'd love for you to come as well." And I was like, "Damn, that's amazing, dude!" But like, I couldn't afford it. It was way too much. I was only just really starting off with my podcast at that point. I think it was like, $5 grand or something crazy. So I was just like, I can't really afford this. And so I was just talking in my Discord, like to my Patreons, and just saying, oh, I'd love to go out and do this, but dude, it's like 5 grand. I can't be spilling 5 grand right now. And then one of my Patreons messages me in privately and just like basically says like, hey, long story short, I'm pretty wealthy guy. I've got a lot of successful businesses under my belt. I want to pay for your trip. And so he paid for my trip. Dude, he sent me all the money for it, paid for my trip. It was like I was meant to be out there for real. At least that's how it felt. All of these things aligning, and having this weird moment in my life and getting this tattoo, getting invited, couldn't afford it. Opportunity comes to actually get it paid for me. So I went out to Egypt and met Timothy Hogan for the first time. Spent 2 weeks traveling from Cairo to Luxor to Aswan down the River Nile. It was incredible, absolutely incredible. We went into the pyramids. We had some pretty weird experiences, actually. We even had a UFO experience
Really?
out in
What
Saqqara.
happened there?
Let me just clear my throat real quick. Yeah, we had it was really interesting actually because we were out at the Saqqara complex, which is like they call it a necropolis and like a huge burial site, but that's very debatable in terms of what the actual function of this place was, especially when you get into like the pyramid of Unas and some of these pyramid sites around there, very acoustically resonant. Like once you get into them, my God, the acoustics are just insane. So we were inside the temple complex of Saqqara, looking at the acoustic elements, going into the Serapeum, which is the subterranean labyrinth that's below ground, where you've got these incredible 70 plus ton granite boxes, these granite sarcophagi. I mean, like, you're standing next to them even as like a 6 foot tall guy, and you're just looking up like, what? These massive, massive boxes, precision carved and polished to a point which is like a mirror. Really just insane. And they're inside a subterranean labyrinth that is like these small tunnels, these really thin, small tunnels. Like how they actually navigated these 70-ton blocks through these tunnels is another massive question mark. So we were out in this place, and then we were coming back onto the minibus, and Timothy Hogan has this incredible old school journal of his, which is like leather bound, and it's like something out of the Da Vinci Code. It's full of his like scribblings on his travels, which you would expect, right? It's full of all of his travels and scribblings and little symbols and things like that. And he was trying to find a passage that was like about a UFO experience that a pharaoh had documented, and it's in like the third dynasty or something like that. And he's reading this transcript of this UFO encounter with this great fiery disc that came over the sky, and people fell to the ground and didn't know what to do. And apparently it says like all manner of volatiles rained down from the sky from this great fiery disc, fish and other volatiles. It was like all this weird stuff that they were saying about, which is actually ties into a lot of UFO cases with debris and strange things being ejected out of them. So it's an interesting story. But as he was telling that story, and we're leaving Saqqara, and you've kind of got this amazing view of the step pyramid, and it's just a crisp blue sky, and there was a bright white flash of light in the sky. And I can't remember who saw it first, but someone was like, "Hey, did you just see that?" And we all look around, and we saw this bright white flash of light, and then another flash of light on the other side of the sky, and then another one next to the pyramid, and then another one that was like about 200 meters away from where the first one flashed. I think about 5 or 6 consecutive white flashes in a completely crisp blue, middle of the day sky, and about 12 people saw it on the tour bus. So yeah, it kind of signatured the the end of that trip. It was really cool.
It almost seems like they know who they're in the
Yeah, I
presence
think
of,
they do.
right?
I think they do.
Yeah,
Whatever they are.
Yeah, I think the fact that it was Tim Hogan means something, right? Like the fact that they showed up for you, and that it doesn't seem to happen to everybody, man. Like I had an experience when I was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base guarding.
Oh well, that's a place to have an experience for sure, right? Because that place
absolutely is. Yeah, well, I mean, and it's so embedded in the lore in Great Falls in Montana. Like they have a minor league baseball team, and their mascot is the Voyagers, and it's literally a little green alien, like for Toy Story is kind of what it looks like if you're familiar. But it's not me they're there for. I think they have an interest in, I think the nuclear weapons that are there, but I think it goes a lot deeper than that. I think there's just an interest in the weapons there, which is kind of like leads to my question for you about the purpose. I think there's no grand unifying theory of history beyond, and this understanding we have. I agree with you. You've said before you don't think that the Egyptians built the pyramids. You think that they found them. I agree with you. I also think the same goes for some of these Central and South American cultures like the Aztec, and I think they found these places. And that is actually in Aztec history. They discuss finding, I think it's the city of Tenochtitlan that they find, and they named it that, but it had another name beforehand. What do you think all of this is? Do you feel like that Egypt was maybe just a place that survived maybe this cataclysm that erased all of this history before that we don't know about, and it's just survived, and that happened to be just like one of the epicenters of a lost civilization, or what? Like, how do you feel about it?
Well, we definitely have a habit in the West of going out to places historically and assigning a narrative to, how something was built or when a culture built something. A great example is a place like Peru. Peru is littered with unbelievable multi-ton megalithic architecture, which is precision carved, but it's also heavily destroyed in many areas. Massive pieces of stone that have like staircases cut into them that are upside down, huge debris fields. And then you have very simple stone work, very simple stone walls and buildings and huts and temples. And we attribute this all to the Inca of about 900 years ago, roughly. But this is literally like a complete impossibility. Right, so this is one example. Egypt, again, is another example where you have layers of architecture and you have layers of cultural advancement that are being falsely all attributed and bundled up with the dynastic Egyptians, or even just the old kingdom Egyptians before like pharaonic reign. And it's not correct in my opinion, because there are elements of Egypt specifically that are so contradictory to what we understand to be the toolkit of the ancient Egyptians, of what we understand to be the capabilities of that particular time period, within the Copper and Bronze Age period, where they were working with very basic tools. And yeah, there are arguments for certain things like the abrasive slurries they were using, which had quartz and, like ways in which they were able to grind through granite, but not at the speed and the precision that they were obviously doing it, because it's on such a large scale. This isn't just specific little elements. There's such huge industrial scale levels of cutting granite, working with multiple tons, working with huge geometries and configurations in sites and construction, and also extremely advanced hydrology. That's another thing that you see in some of the more ancient sites, like the Osirian in Abydos, which is a really interesting area, because you have this temple that's attributed to Seti I, but then adjacent to that temple, sunken down into the ground, you have the Osirian, which is made of these really huge blocks of limestone and granite. There's no hieroglyphs engraved onto them, and the entire site is flooded with water. It's completely flooded out because it taps down into the water table through this complex network of shafts and underground tunnels that have been completely precision made to channel the water up. And we can't even get down into some of these. Like, it hasn't been explored. They tried to drain it, multiple times. They've tried to drain the Osirian, and it just fills back up. Right, so it's like this really weird place that's like incredible hydrology, multi-ton megalithic stone building, and it's the level of the stone building that you just think, like, if it was hard for them to do, they wouldn't be doing it all the time at this scale. But you find it all over the world, and it shares very similar signatures, very similar engineering styles, very similar configurations, the geometries used, the type of temple sites, the structures, the materials, the alignments, a lot of alignments to the solstice, to the equinox, to geodetic lines, like telluric flows of electromagnetic energy in the planet. There's a lot of alignment in the henges and dolmens that we find from Stone Age cultures, Stone Age, all over the world. That's another psyop, in my opinion, is this concept of the Stone Age that we have, where it's just this very rudimentary, primal form of humanity. And yet it's at this point when apparently we were working with, bone antler tools and basic clubs and throwing stones at deers and maybe sharpening a stick enough to make a spear. But at that time we make Stonehenge and Newgrange and all these incredible multi-ton megalithic geometric Gobekli Tepe. So yeah, there's huge problems with the historical narrative, and that seems to echo around the world, not just in Egypt. There are focal points like Egypt, like Peru, like some other areas, Russia as well, which is very secretive, but there are some very strange megalithic sites out in Russia. It's just harder to get evidence of them. But in terms of what I think it represents, I do think that there's elements of a lost civilization that goes back to, 12,800 pre-Younger Dryas, pre-cataclysmic floods going across the planet. And that we are seeing the remnants of that, and we're seeing the aftermath of the survivors who are picking up the pieces and rebuilding their society. So there's a lot of layers in Egypt that are clearly rising up from a blueprint. And the weird thing is, when you get down to the most ancient parts of Egypt, down to what looks like the blueprint, it's way more advanced than all of the stuff that comes after it. So it's like, okay, so they were working from a blueprint that actually is better than what they could even achieve. So there was a huge vacuum of knowledge that was clearly lost. And that, in my opinion, would be the cataclysmic destruction of whatever was going on this planet before our history began.
I agree. I know it's I guess it's anecdotal because there's no way to truly prove a lot of this, but I've always found the link between especially the Central and South American cultures and the Egyptians to be wild, and I know a lot of other people do too because of the use of the pyramids, right? And even down to their geometric size and the scope of them is almost identical in certain places. And then again, the alignments to constellations and other astral bodies and these lines, like you were saying, these natural energy flows. And then reading, like I remember sitting in a Humvee actually and reading Fingerprints of the Gods and listening or reading Graham talk about how there's a room, and I think it's in the Temple of the Moon, and it's the inner sanctum of this temple pyramid is a specific stone, and the name of the stone leaves my brain right now, but he describes the temple as this sort of casing for the inside of something that can pick up on frequency with this stone. And he likens it to like a cable, how there's the rubber casing on the outside, then everything on the inside. And that screams, having the advanced knowledge of understanding these things. And it's not done. You don't, if we are to believe that you're using stone tools and using bone and you're using slurries to make things, then time is of the essence and time is very precious to you. So it's, you would think if you're spending all your time doing something that a lot of the precision and then the decoration and the utility of some of these things would just be based on the most basic things of essential needs, right? Just maybe food and shelter, if indeed it is that you're spending that much time on it. And then too, to look at the mythology of the someone like the Aztecs and the Mayans or the Incan mythologies and then Egyptian, I've always thought it was odd that we attribute all of this to just, hey, these are stories that people came up with, and they just got really creative with flying objects in the sky, and all these other cultures too that you learn about that have this similar stories about spiritual beings fighting in the sky and things like that. It has never made sense to me that it was just ideas that people passed on as tradition.
No, well, if we saw the same thematic sequencing that we see if we saw this in biology or chemistry, we would call this a shared ancestry, right? But because it's a bunch of stories being told from different cultures, we just completely disregard it. We don't consider it a branch of information about the human story, even though there are over 200 cultures worldwide that have flood myths. And so it's like, this is a very weird error in judgment and critical thinking, where it clearly represents a shared experience across the world that has been documented by pretty much every single culture that would have experienced a global deluge, a global flood, and cataclysm and geological trauma on various degrees of scale. And you see this again. Peru is such a good example of this, because the desolation and destruction is really clear. But then you have the Inca buildings that are not destroyed. But we're told that the Inca built both of these things, and yet you have a standing and completely unblemished Inca construct right next to megalithic work that is shattered and broken into huge pieces. So it contradicts itself. It's clear that there was massive geological issues going on in these areas, and that they were trying to resist it. Places like Sacsayhuaman, for example, in Peru, where you've got this cyclopean stone building where it's like these marshmallow type stones all smushed together in weird precision, almost like they were softened, which is a belief that a lot of people have, that they were able to soften the stone. Maybe it's a geopolymer mix of some form, and that they were able to essentially soften it and squish it all together. But it's also incredibly seismically resistant. It's anti-earthquake types of designs, and so it feels like they were expecting something. They didn't necessarily succeed in being able to protect their entire civilization from destruction, but they were certainly trying. And that seems evident in the architectural engineering, which is absolutely earthquake resistant engineering. And again, that is echoed around the world. And on my series on Egypt, we showed the Menkaure pyramid exterior, where you have the very similar cyclopean style of stone in rose quartz granite. This is another thing to mention, that the hardness of the stones they're working with are incredible. I mean, we're talking 7 out of 10 on the hardness scale, diamond being the hardest. Rose quartz granite is 7.5 out of 10. Copper tools are 3.5 out of 10. So, you're already working with a massive discrepancy here. This is a big problem. Yes, they may have used abrasive slurries, and yes, they may have had methods to, create some form of quarrying into granite, but the idea that you could use copper tools on, again, the massive scale that's being demonstrated in all of the architecture and all of the huge demonstrations of cutting granite, to be able to do it at that scale, you need to be able to do it easily. And you're not doing it easily with copper. You're not doing it easily. You'd need a reinforced copper, and even then, even with an alloy and an abrasive, you're struggling.
Yeah, Peru is also where the Nazca lines.
Oh man, yeah. Have you watched Jesse Michael's recent thing on the Peruvian mummies?
Oh yes, I have. The tridactyl fingers on those.
Yeah,
things.
his recent episode drop on that. Whew, yeah, fantastic. I mean, it's fascinating.
It is. I agree with the premise that the Nazca lines are intentionally meant to be viewed from the air, I think. Which
for sure. I mean, there's no other way to view them, essentially. Even from the highest vantage point of that area, you cannot see them properly. So
right. It kind of makes you wonder, first off, why spend the time doing these things, and what are you doing them for? And I think one of the things everybody goes back to are the Nephilim and the Watchers, the Book of Enoch, and this idea. I don't disagree with it, and I think that there absolutely has to be some sort of relationship that had to go on, where there's an education piece, right, to learning about these things. If we're to think that we're Homo sapiens and we've been this way for X amount of years, for thousands of years, and along this chronological line of evolution or whatever, and then we're told, in the Book of Enoch, that the Watchers are these angels that came down to earth, and they lay with the daughters of men, and they had these giants. Goliath is an example of that in the Bible, and there's so many other examples. And it tells you too that it taught them about metallurgy, it taught them about makeup, it taught them how to make weapons, all these different things. That it does seem like there would be an education. And if something like the Younger Dryas took a period where there was a massive loss in people, where you have this maybe this oral history of knowledge that's been saved, And then you have, like you were talking about before, this idea of everything being put back together. It does sort of look like that. You know, if you and I are all that's left after an asteroid hits the planet, like we know about cell phones, we know about computers. I don't know that you and I could recreate all of this stuff. But as time goes on, and maybe we meet a few other people who have different skill sets, right? It does, you know, maybe we could come up with some idea of it. But do you think that then do you assign a set of credibility to the idea of the Nephilim, these watchers, teaching people, or do you think, yeah?
I think it's interesting, man. I think it's really interesting. And do you remember in the Book of Enoch where the Watchers were said to have descended on the earth?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It was Mount Hermon,
Right.
right? Mount Hermon, and that was in Lebanon, right? So in Lebanon you have Baalbek. You know about Baalbek?
Yeah. I don't.
Yeah. Okay, well, in Baalbek, which
Please
is
teach
it's named after the Storm Lord Baal, which is what all the conspiracy theorists like to talk about, Baal,
Yes.
right? Moloch and all that. So you've already got this
yeah.
old god connection going on.
Yes.
Baalbek, so the Lord of the Bekaa Valley, that's the kind of name of Baalbek, and this is in Lebanon. This is where you have a quarry where you have 3 stones. I'm going to get the numbers wrong a little bit, but I'm pretty much on with 1,100 tons, a limestone block weighing 1,100 tons, another limestone block weighing, I think, about 1,500 tons, and another one weighing about 1,800 tons, all in the same quarry. There's photos of people standing on them where you've got like about 80 people all standing on top of this one block, right? Incredibly huge megalithic blocks. About 500 meters down the road from that quarry, you have a temple site called the Temple of Jupiter. Now, this is a temple site that is attributed to the 1st century Romans. It's very obvious that the 1st century Romans did build a pretty significant portion of the Temple of Jupiter. It's their style. But the foundation blocks and then a couple of blocks above them are insane because you've got this 3 stone series called the Trilithon stones, which are about 30 meters above the ground, raised above other large stones, and placed with precision as a foundation layer of this temple. And these stones weigh conservative range around 800 tons, going up to about 1,000 tons. Now, the 1st century Romans actually, you know, they bragged about a lot of the things they did because they were proud of what they were achieving, and they achieved a lot of incredible things that were worth bragging about. One of them being the fact that they managed to move and lift the Lateran obelisk from Alexandria to Rome, and this weighed about, I want to say, 400 tons. That's it, though. They didn't say anything about Baalbek, where they lifted...
Right.
potentially 1,000-ton blocks to create this temple. They never documented this once. And so I think that it's more likely, as it is in many areas around the world where you see this kind of thing, that they found foundations and they built upon those foundations because the blocks get a lot smaller. Suddenly you see Roman engineering, you see Roman building, but these foundation stones, there's no way a wooden pulley and rope system could lift a 1,000-ton limestone block and place it with precision. There's just no way. You'd need one of the most advanced cranes today to be able to lift that and precision place it. So no, these question marks pop up everywhere. In terms of why I'm talking about Baalbek, look at what's going on there, and then think about the implications of the Nephilim and the giants and the Watchers and the introduction of technology. And it's like, well, something was going on in Baalbek. Not quite sure what it was, but they were using these incredibly huge stones, and based on what they were quarrying, even though these ones never left the quarry site, they were going up to 1,800 tons. 1,800 tons. That's like that's incomprehensible. And so, yeah, man, it all stopped. They're still lying there in the quarry. So what happened? Did it get destroyed? Was there a flood? Did something stop all of this from happening? It kind of looks that way. So yeah, it
does.
I'm not a Bible believer. Look at all the religions, look at all of the different scripts and, you know, all the different theologies and philosophies. There's a pattern, and that pattern needs to be paid attention to.
I agree. I think that if you're only going off of like biblical history for an example, that you're boxing yourself into such a small box when you look at all of the other religions and cultures that are out there that have these histories that are shared. This is in law enforcement, this would be a pattern you'd pay attention to and recognize and run down as a way to solve whatever it is you're trying to solve. And I often wonder if the people that lived at this time, that were like the Romans, the first century Romans, building on top of these things, where you could see, when Roman architecture starts to begin, the mythology that we talk about, them having in these belief systems, it does seem in hindsight that they believed it's real, that it's not just a story the way, some other things are looked at. And it kind of it's always made me wonder, like, why this relationship seemed to end as well with a cataclysm. If there's this relationship going on with the Nephilim, and if we're to believe the Nephilim are what they say they are, and they should, I think this idea that they died out, right? These giants or whatever, they died out, that's probably true, that they were giants, and that maybe these race of giants died out because other people, maybe they killed them, or whatever, story you want to come up with. But the spiritual element of it as well would mean that, the physical may die off in a giant, but the spiritual aspect in these relationships should still carry on. And it kind of makes me wonder, it seemed to stop very overtly, and I know that there's some conversation about whether those relationships still continue today more covertly with this idea of the elites and world governments and things like that contacting and talking to whatever
the preservation of Anunnaki bloodlines going back to the seed race or the Nephilim race, or
right,
however you want to look at that.
Exactly. It's just interesting that it seems why something like a great deluge would stop that relationship. You would think that if they were helping before, and we come up with, they showed us how to make all these wonderful things, and like you talked about this, the resonance and the properties it has for healing, or whatever else is going on, or the way to manipulate stone for protection, it's earthquake resistant, why that seems to stop post a flood and the new beginning of humanity and all this. It seems to have gone underground, for lack of better term.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the era of the dinosaurs, and then you have like the era of the giants, and there was never to be repeated again. And even in even in the Bible, in Genesis, it's like such a weird little short statement that's given that just leaves you wanting so much more, where it says there were giants in those times, and in the times after those, great mighty men of renown, great kings of men. And then it's just like never addressed again, never talks about it again. It's just like a little side note right at the beginning of essentially the beginning of the Bible, where it's like, there were giants and they've been around and they were doing really crazy stuff, and now we're moving on. And
it's like, go back to that. You can't just walk past it and say all this. Please elaborate.
Like, I was expecting this to be the lead premise of the book. Like, I skipped to the end and I didn't find giants. What's going on?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's. I think I don't know what explains the complete lack of the continuation of whatever knowledge sharing may have been going on at this point, but it certainly seems like. You look at places like Gobekli Tepe, where they found out that it was purposefully buried. Okay, it was deliberately buried, and this was constructed essentially just after the Cataclysm, just after when things were starting to settle down again. And they built Gobekli Tepe. I would argue that they built Gobekli Tepe as a learning center to try and bring back knowledge that was lost from this previous civilization. That this was an area of teaching. And what would you do if you were a bunch of academics and scholars from, let's say, Atlantis or whatever it was, and you end up surviving a cataclysm? You would seek out people to help you survive. Well, we know that in that area of Turkey there were hunter-gatherers. We know that because the historians are so adamant to try and maintain the idea that hunter-gatherers managed to construct Gobekli Tepe, which is very outside of the scope of their capabilities. Again, going back to that argument of spears and hide tents and suddenly constructing megaliths with equinoxial and celestial alignments. No, thank you. I'm sorry. Don't buy that at all. So I would argue that it seems almost like these academics and elites and intellectuals who were left trying to survive, well, they would seek out the hunter-gatherers who actually knew how to survive, like we would in this day and age. If all of the electricity fell down, people would be trying to find the neighbor who was prepping, right? The one who knew, the one who was already trying to, prepare for it. You're looking for resources, looking for help. And so what did they bring to the tribe? Well, they had their knowledge. They had their intellectual knowledge. They had interesting things to try and present, and they started constructing this place. This is just a complete hypothesis. I don't say this is real. It's just my idea about it. But, they start building Gobekli Tepe, right, as a learning center. The fact that it's purposely buried makes me think that maybe, let's say a chieftain turns around and says, you know what? The desolation and the destruction of our tribes occurred because of these people incurring the wrath of God by doing what they've been doing, developing these vast civilizations, these towering edifices, this ego, this destruction of the land. No, not having it. And they go and they kill them. They literally just kill them, and they say, you're not doing it again. Look what happened to us. Look what happened to the earth. This was God being angry with you, and so we're going to kill you, and we're going to bury your site. Maybe that's what happened, right? So there was like a deletion of this knowledge from the people that survived because they didn't want this to be repeated again. The tribes, the suspicious, more superstitious tribes looking at these intellectuals as essentially, well, it's done today. Demons, you're bringing back some demonic force. And so perhaps that's what happened. But with the giants, I don't know, man. I don't know what explains it. There's weird stories as well. Like, that I love some of these stories, even though they can never be evidenced. Like that special, it was like a special forces team out in Afghanistan that encountered a blue-skinned giant in a cave or anything like that, These like remnants of things that might still be going on. But I've also made the argument, and I made it on Jesse Michaels, that the alien greys might be a subterranean subspecies of hominid that just opted for underground living. And they weren't affected by the surface traumas of our worlds. They didn't have the resets we had, and they've been quietly developing underground in secret, and their skin goes translucent and their eyes go wide and black to deal with the cave systems. And maybe they've been interacting. You look at these different tribes, like the Hopi ant people, the tribal mythologies that talk about these beings that look like greys, sound like greys, and they come up from the ground and they help during times of strife and times of trauma. And it's like these interactions that seem to be happening between humanity and these strange beings, it's recorded in so many different instances that I've got to say that there's got to be some level of truth to it. I agree. It's just very hard to pinpoint down specifics. Mainly because I would argue a lot of it is probably sitting under places like the Vatican, vast libraries of theological information that's just taken from us.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's a lazy way to do business to just say all of these stories, like the ant people, for example. That's it. They're just stories because it doesn't fit the narrative. I don't know what it is, man. There's almost like this reticence or even fear to think outside the box. And I think a lot of it has to do with academia not wanting to let go of this, authority that they have over the narrative. And there's so many examples of that. Even in recent history with science, so to speak, I think you might know what I'm talking about. I don't want to get this episode nuked over on YouTube, but I agree with you very much that that's not just stories. And your idea, I wanted to go back to it about them killing them. I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because not to like pigeonhole groups of people, but sure, if you are like these Harvard grad academics, there's an asteroid that hits Earth and you're looking for people, and you find a bunch of good old boys out in Appalachia that survive because they live out in the mountains, and you'd think maybe they established this relationship and they agree to work together, like you said, because of what just happened. And it's a natural way to be. You start to grow skeptical of the people that aren't telling you everything you're doing, and maybe they've convinced you to help them build this site because there's so many of you, and you grow skeptical because of the things you're being asked to do and the things you're being told to do, and it doesn't make sense. It's different, and that's human beings is what it sounds like. I mean, you can't say necessarily that that's Occam's razor because there's no actual hard evidence, but it seems simple enough, right? Like without there being why being buried, it doesn't make a lot of sense for it to be buried.
I feel like it makes more sense than the builders themselves burying it. At least there's a reason behind this. At least there's a potential reason behind it.
Yeah, we'll bury it
and we have, like you said, we have historical reference of this being a human psychological trait. So it's possible, but yeah, I think so much has been buried, so much has been stolen. The Library of Alexandria, so much has been burned and raided. We have just an incredibly shattered puzzle piece of human history, and it's a shame that the parts of it that remain secret are not considered as more of a problem, because for example, the Vatican Church and the Apostolic Archives, the secret archives as they're known, of the Vatican Church, there's over 53 miles of shelving. 53 miles worth of shelving to house all of these manuscripts and documents and artifacts that have been secured over time. And it operates like a special access program, like a compartmentalized program in the government, because you have to have... Well, for example, you have to be a specific scholar within a specific degree of learning in theology. Then you can make a request for information that's based on a paper you're writing on XYZ. And then if you get approved for that, you get given that piece of information. You don't get access to the archive ever. It's completely siloed and stovepiped. And this is our own history. This is like 53 miles of our own history that we're not allowed to access. So to think that we have the full picture is insane. We clearly, evidently do not have the full picture.
Yeah. Well, what do humans do? What do humans do? We take things that are nice, and we take things that are worth remembering, and we put them in locations together, right? And you look back. One of the things I was talking to Tim Hogan about was how the Templar during the Crusades, where he described it was almost a competition between them and the Roman Catholic Church to gather and hoard, essentially, lost histories and artifacts and things like that. It makes sense to then that if you are the Roman Catholic Church, you're trying to scope a narrative and you're trying to force that narrative onto people because it's easy to control, then you would want to and would hide everything. And then you reading in like Diana Pasulka's book, American Cosmic, when she talks about Tyler or Tim Taylor, with seems to be that's who that is, and his experience, that they shared there in the Vatican archives. And she said how he walked away with an even deeper faith than he already had. Whatever he saw, right, like the spiritual aspect of that. That's kind of wild to think about then too, when you consider what like he does and working for NASA and his association to the space programs and all these other USAPs that he's supposedly got access to. I think that first and foremost, the Catholic Church is probably responsible for the deletion of a ton of different things that we should know about our history. And I think that it's 100% probably rooted in the control of people, and then to maintain the divinity of Jesus Christ, because without that, then you don't have a religion, I guess, right? If you can refute that, and it's indisputable evidence that you refute that, then all of that power sort of goes away. But the concept of hiding information and then hoarding it away from other people on the scale that it has been, it's kind of weird to me then how well that they've done it and how well they've been able to hide it. And I think that some of these places like you're talking about, like Baalbek and these other sites in ancient Egypt, you can't walk away with a massive stone quarry, and you can't walk away with a temple with 100,000 ton stones, right? That eventually, folks like you are going to come out and say, well, let's talk about the logistics of this, right? Let's talk about the logistics of using, logs to roll stone and reed boats and all this. It doesn't make sense. You can't hide that, right? You can't get rid of any of that stuff. And so now we're reaching the point where there is, like you said before, the alternative media space is not letting this go. But it's when you look,
and as technology is growing as well, with the way that technology is able, I mean, like this documentary series in Egypt, it's all shot in 4K, and that's just on an iPhone. That's on the iPhone 16. Okay, and like they're talking about the way that they are in Egypt towards quite standoffish in terms of trying to do presentations or do videoing and filming. They can be quite problematic with that kind of stuff. But it just goes to show as well, like you say, how things are changing and transforming, because my buddy had like a GoPro on a mounted like shoulder mount, and they made him take that shoulder mount off. They were really suspicious of it. He had to take that away, remove that. Little do they know I've got a 4K 120 frames per second camera running doing an Attenborough documentary because they didn't, take the smartphone away. They used to tourists with smartphones. So the accessibility that we've got now is beyond anything that they were able, even if I'm not allowed to go up to that site, I can zoom in on that optic very nicely and get a crisp image. So even if you don't let me walk up, I can still find it and put it up and show people. And so it's the same around the world. We're able to access drone technology. We're able to find these things and record them, document them, present them, put them out there. And I mean, literally one clip of just as a point to prove in terms of the fact that the alternative media can beat the mainstream in terms of pushing forward the evidence and actually overcoming the numbers. I had one clip on X which was of a granite sarcophagus that had drill marks, really profound, just drill marks going straight down into it. It got 8.1 million views, man, on X. Yeah, it's like, this is what you can't compete with that. Like, so this is what I mean is like, we're able to put it out there now at a level which they can't compete with. And it's probably going to get a bit messy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the bigger fears, not to tangent this too hard, but like consider a country like the United States where we have this very, very thick layer of Christianity as a base layer for morality. If you start introducing a lot of these ideas and concepts, like one of the things that we talked about with Tim Hogan was about how the Templar claimed to have the bones of Jesus Christ, which is very antithetical to the Christian story of Christ ascending in full body into heaven. So there would be no bones, right? If you can come out with all this evidence and show it, then it would get really weird. To your point, earlier you were sort of talking about a lot of the evidence that you guys, I guess, have gathered to show that these places are aligned to celestial bodies, and these lines for I'm not going to remember the language you use. I apologize. What was it? Telemetry?
It was telluric currents. Telluric, telluric, and it's like it's the electromagnetic. It's like the fault lines in the Earth where you've got cracks in the crust. Electromagnetic energy propagates through there stronger, so you've got these kind of like strong networks of electromagnetic energy that run through the planet, and it's just on these networks that you happen to get a concentration of henges and dolmens and these ancient kind of piezoelectric material constructed buildings and Stone Age projects. So it again, being aligned to the equinox, the solstice, these geodetic alignments to telluric flows, cosmic, as above so below, it definitely seems like there's an energetic component to this, especially because the materials themselves are very typically made out of very dense quartz-rich stone, which is naturally electrically conductive, often coupled with limestone, which is an amplifier of acoustics. And then the sites themselves are often engineered in a geometry that actually propagates acoustics more profoundly. So you actually have a lot of these examples all over the world. Stonehenge is one. Newgrange in Ireland. I was recently in Malta, where I still need to release a documentary, but I've got to go back out there and film even more. Where you have incredible temple sites and a very, very incredible acoustically tuned subterranean temple site made of limestone. What's important is that these materials actually are complementary towards each other. So if you have a multi-ton geometrically engineered stone structure that resonates acoustics very profoundly, and you make it out of this limestone material, if you're incorporating rose quartz granite or something high quartz content into that matrix as well, there's a geoenergetic coupling that will occur between the acoustic amplification that's coming from the limestone, because limestone helps propagate acoustics. The Romans, the Greeks, they knew this. They built colosseums and auditoriums out of limestone because the back seats, you'd be able to hear someone on stage. It propagates through that stone very nicely. So the propagation of acoustics through the limestone, which then is an acoustic vibrational stimuli for the piezoelectric components of the rose quartz granite or the quartz-rich stone that you're using. So there will be a natural electric conductivity occurring from that acoustic vibration. And so you've got all of these complementary engineering elements that would signify a form of science, a clear form of science that they understood. And then it taps into human consciousness when we find out that a lot of the acoustic engineering is set to bandwidths that will influence the human brain, change it from alpha to theta or delta, and shift the function and perception of human brainwave. And so there is a very deep acoustic consciousness aligned with the stars and the planet science package that's being put up and represented in these megalithic multi-ton stone building projects globally.
Yeah.
You know, and that to me is a really strong signature. The Stone Age, again, the Neolithic Age, all over the world. This is a strong signature to me of a lost civilization. We've got the skeletal remnants of it in these massive megalithic stone projects from the Stone Age.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, too, when you look at the tenets of a group of people like the Templar or the Rosicrucians. They have this idea, like you were talking about before, about like as above, so below, as within, so without. And this idea of transcendence. And when I was talking to John Madrowski, he was talking about how like this concept of like the alchemical change in yourself is it's an allegory, but like I guess it doesn't have to be an allegory, because it's the same principles that looks like it's just been carried over almost into I don't know what to call it, maybe an ideological viewpoint of this, of bettering yourself. And it has a purpose. To use the word that you use, science has a purpose. There's biology has a purpose. Physics has a separate purpose, right? You don't just come up with a science for no reason. You know, do you think that this, first of all, I'm going to just back that up real quick and say, I think that the survival of that idea across time and into some of these secret groups of people like the Rosicrucians or the Templar or the Masons, I think is just, again, evidence that these ideas go back way further than we realize. But it seems to me like you're talking like the resonance, you were discussing these caves and some of these other temples in Egypt. Do you feel like this was a form of communication or tapping into communicating to beings and gaining like knowledge, which is again a concept through this hidden knowledge and Hermeticism, for example?
Yeah, I guess I do. And I think it was also about expanding the inward journey through meditation and expanding and deepening states of consciousness, which in of itself can be a trigger point for interactions with what we might call non-human intelligences. I have my own experiences of going out into my garden at night and projecting intentions for having a contact, and I had experiences. That's why I created Project Unity in the first place, was because I had experiences. So I think that there was a component of this. I had a really interesting conversation with a anesthesiologist and a quantum biologist called Dr. Stuart Hameroff, and he is the co-author of a theory alongside Sir Roger Penrose, very famous scientist. And their theory, which is called the Orchestrated Objective Reduction Theory, or OR, is about the brain and neurons in the brain, and specifically very tiny elements within the neurons in the brain called microtubules. Have you come across this?
I have not, no.
No, so inside the brain are these tiny helical structures called microtubules, and basically their hypothesis is that these microtubules are responsible for allowing our consciousness to interact on quantum levels, on an interactive state with the quantum field of information that is at the basement, bedrock, foundation level of reality. And that these microtubules are tiny enough to pick up on vibrations in quantum fields, very subtle perturbations in these, you know, very, very subtle fields that permeate through reality. And what I think is happening with a lot of these acoustic resonance temples is that they're essentially, because one of the elements of this hypothesis around the microtubules is that the quantum coherence, I'm not a physicist, so I'm like, you know, this is all coming from memory. The quantum coherence within these microtubules, when they're actually coherent and stabilized within a quantum field, is very fleeting, very fleeting. So the actual ability to expand that experience and keep the brain essentially in a quantum state for longer is something that's done through meditation, something that's done through psychedelic experiences, through near-death experiences. These things seem to excite the microtubules. And so I think that a lot of these acoustic structures that clearly were engineered to interact with brainwaves, because they do influence brainwaves and they promote the brain to move up into different bandwidths of frequency of thinking, very literally on a biophysical level, which can be read electromagnetically. I think that there is not that they understood this as a micro quantum biologist or anything like that, because I don't think that's really the case. I think it's more intuitive, spirit-based, science that was then picked up on, and we're now looking at it with our incredible tools and going, whoa, hang on a second, like how were they able to do that? But I think that what they might have been doing is like using these acoustic resonance complexes to elongate the expansion of the quantum coherence. All right, so the longer you're able to stay in this acoustic resonance complex, the longer you're able to bring your consciousness into these bandwidths and stay in this kind of elongated experience of a spiritual process. So I think that there's a component, I don't know if this explains all of it, but in terms of the acoustic engineering, especially in places like, for example, this temple in Malta, the Hypogeum of Halseflieni in Malta, which is just off the coast of Italy. Really incredible place. And in fact, this is actually, it's a very small island, but it's got the largest concentration of megalithic stone building sites from the Stone Age in the world. It's littered with them. And the original settlers from Italy, from areas like Sicily, when they came over to Malta in the Bronze Age, they came and they found this island covered in temples, but no one living there. No one knows who constructed all of these weird temples on this island. Right. But there's one in particular called the Hypogeum, which is underground. It's this subterranean, incredible, multi-layered, geometrically crafted limestone temple, all out of the solid limestone bedrock, at a time before the wheel, at a time before bronze and copper tools. This is deep into the Neolithic. They date it to like 5,000 BC, but that's because that's as far back as they can go. I'll go way further back. I'd say 10, 12, 15,000, you know, in terms of how ancient this site is. But it's acoustically profound. I mean, they've done studies on it. You can look it up. The Hypogeum. I'll send you some links if you want, where they've done a lot of studies on the acoustics. It resonates at exactly 111 hertz, which changes the brainwave into theta. And there are these elongated skulls that were found inside the Hypogeum. One of them is on display in the Museum of Valletta, the Museum of Archaeology in Valletta, which is the local city. And the interesting thing about these ones in particular, these skulls, is they actually lack the sagittal suture, which is the vertical crack that goes down the skull. That's from when we're being pushed through the birth canal, and these two parts of the skull fuse together. The two parietal bones are fused together, and you get this crack. Now, this is an adult skull. It's an adult skull, but it doesn't have the sagittal suture, which is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you're going to die as a baby. If you come out with that, you're going to die. And so it doesn't have that. Completely adult, fully formed skull without that. And it's elongated to quite a profound degree. And apparently hundreds of these elongated skulls were found inside the Hypogeum. It was discovered by a road worker who was literally chipping away at the road, and boom, suddenly goes underground and finds this incredible subterranean labyrinth, acoustically tuned temple. Only 20% of it's available to the public. The rest of it's fully restricted. And they treat that place like a skiff. They took my phone, they took my electronics, they took everything off of you to prevent you from taking any photographs, any video, any audio recordings, nada. So they're very protective over it. And also, there's a lot of places around around Malta, a lot of tourist sites, a lot of archaeological sites. They advertise them, you know, signs this way, 200 meters until you get there. There's no signs for the Hypogeum, which is objectively probably the most impressive site in all of Malta, because it's this incredible subterranean structure. And me and my girlfriend were walking around for hours trying to find it, like, where is this place? And then we just went down this little side street, and it's like a white building with Hypogeum written in black. No photos of what it looks like inside, nothing. It's like they're really not trying to make it easy to find. And yeah, man, so when it comes to the acoustics, I think that there was a spiritual component, an expansion of consciousness, and that bleeds down into, once we get into like the empirical biophysics of it, is, you know, the potential elongation of quantum coherent processes in microtubules in neural networks. But that's kind of like, okay, well, did they know that, or is that just a consequence of the intuitive information they were working with? It's hard to know. I would argue for the latter.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talked about these microtubules. It reminds me of qubits in quantum computing. Like they have such a hard time with them maintaining the state that they're supposed to be in. And it sounds a lot like what you were saying with these microtubules, that you have to use this resonance at what you said, 111 hertz. It like prolongs that process for the brain. It's weird because it's still quantum computing, and the use of information, you know, entanglement on the other side of it, right? It kind of sounds like that as well, but using the human brain and like the download of information, the quantum state, it sounds like, has a hard time for the human brain, or the way, however we're doing with quantum computing, to maintain that state.
With a quantum computer, you have to keep it at incredibly low temperatures, incredibly low, to get that coherence, to get that superposition and coherence. And so the argument against any sort of quantum coherence in the brain has always been that the brain is a wet, noisy, biological environment that is not going to help stabilize coherent quantum effects. But within the microtubules, there are apparently these like little, again, this is like, trailing off into just on the edges of my knowledge base, but within the microtubules, there are like these chambers that have something called like hard water. I think it's called hard water, or it's a special form of water. It's a very strange, stabilized, completely chemically different form of water. And they think that this is actually what's responsible for creating a unique environment within the microtubules that allows for coherence to take place. So there's a lot of elements of these microtubules that almost feel like they're insulators from the wet, noisy, loud biological environment that is completely contradictory to quantum effects. They're a very different element of the body, deep down on the microcellular level, and this is stuff that we're only just starting to tap into and try and figure out. But I think it does speak volumes to potentially evidencing psychic effects, psi abilities. There are things in the brain that, if we can empirically prove interact with quantum fields, then you're essentially proving non-locality in consciousness, because if consciousness can interact quantumly, then it can interact with all quantum elements at once, because quantum affects that way, right? That's how quantum works.
Right. No, it's if you were talking earlier about this having like a spiritual aspect of it, and if we're talking about the Nephilim, and these are beings that are not human but existed, in the Christian sense, in heaven, that came down, right? And you want to provide knowledge to a different race of beings, Homo sapiens, you would have to figure out a way to give them information. And if it's almost like the Matrix. Like, it takes so long to teach you Kung Fu, but if I can download it into your brain and you know it instantly, well, it almost sounds like this is a method to download information without having to drag you through the process of teaching you eons worth of wisdom, and he could give it to you almost instantaneously, And I was going to say, to your point, that I don't know if you've you probably have experienced like vibrations, or been in rooms on purpose, with vibrations. I've experienced it before, where I feel colder. It cools you down, and I've experienced this chill before, and I don't think that's I think that's on purpose. You have to be in this different state, right, I guess, to take that information. But I had no idea about Malta and those skulls and the temples that built there. It's crazy how much history there is. And also
there is a deep Templar connection to Malta.
There is, and the Knights of Malta.
There's the Knights
OTO,
of Malta.
like all these different.
Yeah.
We go ahead if you were about to say something.
No, you good, bro.
Oh, okay. No. I talked about this before. We had a cat on here talking about the Monarch projects, and we were talking about the Knights of Malta a little bit. And it's really crazy to think about this concept. I think you're right on the path with it, that there's the elites, or whatever you want to call them, are just a protection of this ancient bloodline. This is, again, to go back to like tropes and the human psyche and human behavior. Even in the military, there's secret knowledge, and only officers get told certain things, and they keep that information away from like the lower enlisted, us, the peasants like us, and they keep.
And then all of the occult, you just swivel around in your chair, all the occult symbology on the patches that you have,
there's
there's a lot of stuff that's kind of like, wink, wink, nod, nod symbology in the military.
There is. Oh, yeah. I mean, and while we were talking about Tim Taylor, and then Diana Pasolka talks a lot about the symbology in NASA too. But it's wild when you think about it, because I think that's actually what it is. And I don't want to say like I know this, because again, it's like my opinion. I don't and can't say anything with definitive proof. But I do think that's what this is. It's a protection of this bloodline and these different families, I guess you could say, that have been able to maintain this knowledge and maybe still communicate with it. And that if you are, let's kind of put it in this idea, right? Like, if you are the Nephilim, you're teaching human beings these things, and you're showing them how to communicate and download information. And then there's this great deluge, which in so many different religions was supposed to be a punishment on Earth for the things that were going on. And then there's the post apocalypse facet of this, where okay, well, maybe we need to change up the way we do things to where we're more covert more than overt, and as almost a survival mechanism to continue on. That may be an explanation for that, and that because you're so close to what was going on before you had this great flood, and then the people that remained after, maybe you do know about how all of this mythology isn't mythology. There's the beings, whatever you want to call them, the gods or UAP or whatever, and there's this fear that goes with it because of what you said. Well, you guys got God mad at you, so now it's all gone. I think that makes a lot of sense. Not to keep talking in circles on that stuff, but
well, I'll tell you, man, like even if it's not true, they certainly believe it.
Yeah,
they certainly believe it about themselves. I mean, I've met a few strange high-up people that have their beliefs about bloodlines and descendants from X, Y, Z, from ancient history and great kings and conquerors. So, there's definitely an obsession with bloodline lineage and the power that comes with certain families. And that's indisputable throughout history. They've had that power. The question is, do they still have it? I would argue that there are certain elements of that definitely still have power, absolutely. And you probably will not know their names publicly.
No, I agree with that completely. I think that there is probably not the entire story that they still have, but maybe some of it. And that's kind of how it seems to me that they...
And they want to believe it, of course. Like, I've been told I'm descended from these great gods. Like, of course you're going to believe that, aren't you? You're going to love it.
It's one of these things, if you think that that's true and I tell you that it's true and I believe it, that you're not going to believe me anyway. If I say, oh yeah, no, I'm this, and we worship Moloch and we go out into Bohemian Grove and we do this, and this is actually real. The cremation of care actually has some effect on things. It's so fantastical that most people are like, you guys are just kooks that like to go out in the redwoods and do this stuff. But in reality, they actually, like you said, they believe it. I was kind of wondering if you were able to it's so hard to have these conversations in such a short period of time, because I want to go all over the place, but it's like I want to scope some of these things in too. I love this train of thought with these elite bloodlines, these ancient bloodlines of people, and the Hollywood elites, or whatever, the elites, leaders of the world. But I was wondering if you'd be able to walk us through some of the stuff that you've documented in Egypt or wherever that sort of supports this hypothesis about a lost culture of technology and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I said, obviously the Giza Plateau, like there's incredible evidence in the existence of the pyramids of Giza in of themselves. In fact, one of the things that I guess it's almost throwaway because it's said so much, but I think it's one of the most important elements of questioning who built the pyramids. Is you go through Egypt, you go to like the Valley of the Kings or the Valley of the Queens, where a lot of the royalty were buried. You walk into these burial chambers, and every square inch of it is covered in hieroglyphs and Egyptian blue paint and gold and calligraphy and designs. There is not a single hieroglyph inside the pyramids. Not one. Not a single one. And this is meant to be the hallmark of a hieroglyph using culture's achievements, and yet they didn't put any hieroglyphs inside it, and they didn't write about it. There's like a couple of things called the pyramid texts where they're talking about bringing stones to Giza, but there's no description of the pyramids. There's no description of building the pyramids. And it's just like, this runs again in complete contradiction to everything we know about the Egyptians. Like, they were very proud. They have all of this, incredible temples venerating their gods, venerating their pharaohs, but they didn't write about the pyramids. They didn't do iconography of the pyramids. There's no motifs and iconography of them in any of the temples. So the whole hieroglyph issue is a big one. And then you use that template and you take it to other areas. So it's like, okay, the Assyrian, no hieroglyphs. All right, what else is present in the Assyrian? Megalithic multi-ton stones, subterranean shafts, incredible intelligent building design that contradicts the simplistic design of the Seti, the first temple that's adjacent to it. So you have these contradictions, but these contradictions are wrapped up in a pattern that they all seem to represent. They have these features, the pyramids have these features, the Assyrian has these features, the Serapeum, again with these multi-ton, 70-ton plus granite boxes that are in these labyrinths underground that have been precision carved. Another incredible anomaly. There is a place in Egypt called Tanis, Tanis. I haven't been out there. I want to go out there. It's like right out in the desert. Pretty hard to get out to it. But this whole site has got statues, again, desolation, destruction, all broken to pieces, which is one of the things that you find with a lot of the ancient Old Kingdom, the things that they assign to the Old Kingdom, which is where you have no hieroglyphs and these multi-ton blocks. And it's a very strange period of time in regards to what the Old Kingdom really means and what that is. And I've lost my train of thought there. I was traveling to somewhere in my brain. So we've been in the Serapeum. You got the yes, Tanis. Thank you. So Tanis has got these incredible statues that are made of quartzite. Again, incredibly hard statues. And quartzite has a melting point of 1,700 degrees Celsius, which is above the melting point of volcanic lava. And these statues are globular, melted like candle wax. They've got burn marks all over them, and they've got these globular formations that literally look like these things have been dripping and melting, and all these dark burn areas. And this is again something that you find in Peru and around Egypt is these marks that seem like there was a high thermal event of some form, like some crazy thermal event that went on that managed to just like melt and burn a lot of these rocks and stones. And usually it's on one side of a temple or one side of a pyramid site, so it's like it was coming from a direction. It's very strange, and it happens in Peru as well, where you get melted stones and very strange globular formations. But yeah, Egypt is a wealth of different things. I mean, we got in a bit of trouble on the Giza Plateau for getting a little bit too close to the pyramids and filming the granite blocks that had all of these chunks taken out of them in uniform segments, like chunk by chunk by chunk by chunk, very mathematical, and they were all over the place, these huge ones. And we were going up and like filming it, and then suddenly this whistle blows. It's like, get down, no climbing, no climbing. I was like, I'm not climbing, I'm standing on sand. I'm standing on sand, bro. But they get very, funny about that stuff. Still walked away with 4K footage, so I win. But yeah, I mean, there are so many different areas. Karnak is another area where you've got very strange temple sites, and in fact, I had a really weird experience in Karnak Temple. A lot of the times, when you go out to Egypt, especially if you go on a tour group, that's New Age and spiritual, that you get amazing people, but you do get a lot of people who are like, oh, I can feel the energy of every site, and like everywhere they go, they're feeling the energy. And I'm a bit of a skeptic, even though I've had crazy experiences and I'm very open to these things. Like, I kind of roll my eyes at people like that who are like, oh my God, yeah, I can feel it straight away. And it's like, my God, like what am I missing out on here? But we went to Karnak, and there's a statue of a goddess called Sekhmet. And Sekhmet's a very powerful goddess in Egypt, and it's like love and war and defensive mother lioness kind of nature. And these statues are all over the place in Karnak, Sekhmet everywhere. But there's one in particular that the public don't usually get to see, usually involves a bit of baksheesh, a bit of a bribe. And we bribed our way into having the doors unlocked and taken down this area into this, kind of a holding pen for this Sekhmet statue. And I mean, I was filming everything when I was out in Egypt. I was walking around with my camera 24/7 because I just wanted to capture everything. And so we're going into this place, and I'm moving through, down this corridor. And you make your way down this corridor, and then it's a turn into this room with sand on the floor. It's very Indiana Jones style because it's just a very basic stone room with sand on the floor and a single beam of light coming down from an opening in the ceiling that illuminates Sekhmet standing at the back. Wow. This huge, 15-foot statue of Sekhmet in this incredible shiny black basalt or something, very shiny black material. And I walked in, and I kid you not, bro, came around the corner, camera pans onto Sekhmet, and immediately my arms drop down, and I'm just staring at this statue, completely just staring right into the statue. I felt locked onto it, and I actually got this weird feeling of like inertia. I felt like I was being pulled slightly towards it, and my vision was focusing so much on just Sekhmet, and I was gone. I was gone to the point where it literally took my friend going, "Hey, bud, we're going." I was like, "What?" I was like, "What the fuck?" Like, what? And I went to everyone else, like, "Did you feel anything?" And this woman was like, "I felt like I couldn't stop staring. I was locked in place." I was like, "I literally never say this stuff," and I felt the exact same thing. And it was really weird, dude. Like, it was legit. I don't know what material it's made out of, what intention was put into the making of that thing, but there is something going on with that statue that's locked inside Karnak Temple.
It sounds like they've locked it because of that. That's what it makes me
Yeah.
think. We used to let people go down here, but then we had to like shake them awake.
Weird stuff
like, there's
started
something
happening.
powerful
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
I think so, man. I think so. Yeah, and also, there's like the Vatican has like a whole bunch of Sekhmets all set up in their own special room in the Vatican. Like they've got like a domed room with all of these Sekhmet statues that have been taken from Egypt and are just lining this wall. Yeah. We talk about that, me and Trevor Grassi. If anyone wants to check out that interview where I talked to Trevor Grassi, very interesting dude. That guy as well. You should get him on. Talk about Egypt.
Okay.
He's out there getting his fingers into the caves and digging into them and like going on. Oh my god! Like the dude's literally out there on his own in the Giza Plateau, like literally crawling through cave systems to try and prove that there are things under there and stuff. It's nuts.
Yeah. Dude, that's so crazy. It makes me wonder why the Vatican has given them this space. It's like sounds like prestige, like what is that?
Well, there's like a whole thing about the representation of the pineal gland, and that whole room is set up. It almost looks like the inside of a skull. It's like white and red, and I don't know. Like we get into it in the interview.
Yeah.
It certainly feels like there is a level of importance given to Sekhmet, and like I said, I had a very weird experience. So I don't know, man.
That seems to be such a theme throughout all of what we're talking about is this like consciousness connection to all of this in the past. It's always kind of made me wonder if the reason why there was so much that's the same, like we were talking earlier about the Central and South American cultures, is because they're just tapping into the same knowledge source essentially, and that's what comes back is pyramids and statues like this and the use of specific stones, and that's why they were all tapping into the same consciousness, I guess, or same knowledge source. But it's also another thing. Oh, okay. I see you there. My bad, man.
Nah, you're good, bro.
I was just gonna say that there's so many people, even in modernity, that have similar experiences. Like we've talked about Jack Parsons and the way he said that he has information and was able to download information, and that he was going out into the desert with L. Ron Hubbard and Aleister Crowley and
doing some freaky
Thelema
shit.
Thelema to sex magic out there, and the freaking
getting buck wild with L. Ron Hubbard.
Right, dude. Yeah, who would have thought? It's the father of American rocketry, which is it's just so funny because like when you think of like American history, you talk about that period of time. There's this misnomer that there's just so much wholesomeness, and that these people, that were the leaders, the thought leaders, and whatever back at that time were just these like outstanding people. But like no, actually they were into desert sex.
No, it's not Nazis and occultists all the way down, like Operation Paperclip and. Bad things happened, and that's another. I mean, like, it's a whole fascinating era of history. I actually, when I was in not university, but like I guess like a kind of college before university, we had to like study different modules. I was doing history, and we did Nazi German history, which was really interesting. Like learning about the Weimar Republic and the fall of the German government at that time and everything that was going on. But you do not get taught a single shred of any of the esoteric interest, the strange stuff that was going on, and then obviously Paperclip, and the fact that we brought over so many of these people, the Russians, the Americans, the British, everyone fighting over the best and brightest of the Nazi German scientists. And this is stuff that's just completely whitewashed out of conventional history, but it's absolutely true. And the esoteric obsessions, the Vril Society, Anna Nerba, the Thule Society, it's crazy because when you start doing the research on that stuff, you start going like, okay, so like Indiana Jones is basically a documentary with some fluff put onto it. It's basically just like a very action-packed docufilm because they were going to Tibet, they were going to Nepal, they were going out to the Andes and looking for relics, and the OSS, which is what Indiana Jones is a part of, was going out and hunting Nazis. So it's like, it's how they tell this history to us. They won't teach you that in school, but they'll drip it into your brain. They'll massage it in through Indiana Jones and through these things like, yeah, this stuff's real, but we're not going to tell you outright it's real. And that's so interesting to me, because it's like, okay, so why are you telling us anyway? What is it about it that you need us to know, but you don't want us to know that we're being taught it? You just want us to kind of absorb it subconsciously through media, through information. It's very strange.
It says to me that like the Nazis had to know something for them to go out hunting.
They knew
for this
something.
Stuff. They had to. I don't know what it was, like whether the Die Glocke was this anti-gravity thing, or if it was actually a tool that they were using to tap into this resonance to get information or whatever. But like, there's definitely more to the story than the collapse of the Weimar Republic and the German people being angry about the way they were treated post World War One and
man. And then you got like
so much more.
Operation High Jump, where it's like, oh, we're just going to do like the biggest military style operation ever done out to Antarctica post World War because we want to train our troops for reasons. Like, what is going on here? And the fact that the Nazis called it New Schwabenland and were really interested has nothing to do with the fact that we're going over there. So there's like weird stuff like that that's whitewashed again in history, where we just don't know the true story behind that. I've had some people reach out who claim to have had family members who were a part of High Jump. I haven't been able to validate whether or not that's true, but you get these people that reach out sometimes and say they've got interesting family stories about an uncle or a grandfather who was a part of this, that, and the other. And sometimes it's true, and these things need to be looked into.
I agree. Last thing I'll say real quick is the way Admiral Byrd's son died too is really, really strange for somebody whose father was of such renown. He died a vagrant. They found his body essentially in an old factory. His dad had lost contact with him, and there's a bunch of very strange things surrounding him. People had seen him as like a homeless person, and you should really look into.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Want to like go. I know you're like short on time. Don't want to like go too much into it, but his kid died in a very, very weird way. Again, like I said, for somebody who was of such high stature like his dad, and it's
that's
very
crazy.
weird. But thanks for coming on, man. I know this conversation was kind of all over the place. These like first times talking to folks.
That's what I like though. I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they can be all over the place, and maybe next time we talk, we can scope in on one thing. I love this topic though, and especially the topic about the elites. There's so much to talk about. I was actually just talking to a buddy of mine about the Warren Commission, and I don't know. Man. Hale Boggs is. If you don't know who that is, you should.
Hale Boggs.
But anyway, man, I hope you have a really great night whatever you're gonna go do, and
thanks,
best
Brandon.
of luck to you in the success on your docu-series that you're putting out there. I enjoy watching them. I think it's incredible. I'm always just hitting reposts on your stuff because it's so
thank
amazing.
You.
But thanks again for your time.
I'm glad John Majorowski, our mutual friend, told us to have a talk. It's been really awesome, dude. You've run a good show, good questions, great host. And if anyone's listening, if you want to check out Ancient Technologies, it's on Project Unity. 3 episodes out right now. I'm working on the 4th. And then I've kind of ran out, and I'm just going to have to try and get out to Egypt again. And I've got another trip to Malta that I need to try and do, and Peru. So I'm busy, man. I've got to try and get out to all these different places. But I appreciate it if anyone could like and subscribe and support my YouTube channel, Indiana Jones. But I'm trying not to dress like him, because so many people in the alternative history world seem to really enjoy dressing like Indiana Jones. And I find that a bit cringy. So I'm trying my best to not adopt that and, just do it in my own style. But I appreciate it, bro. It's been awesome.
Yeah, man. Nottingham Jones. But all right, man. Take it easy.